She sent me 65 explicit photos with my husband, thinking she'd destroy my marriage and my life. 24 hours later, her face was plastered across every social media platform in Millbrook Heights, trending nationwide as the homewrecker of the year, while I sat in my newly launched digital marketing agency worth $2.3 million. The look of absolute horror on her face when she realized I had turned her cruelest weapon into my greatest business opportunity? Absolutely priceless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The October morning when everything changed started like any other Tuesday in Riverside Commons. I was sitting in my home office, a converted spare bedroom in the modest 2-story house that my husband Derek and I had bought 3 years earlier when we were still dreaming of building something together. The autumn light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting gentle shadows across my laptop screen where I was working on social media campaigns for local small businesses, a side hustle I'd been quietly building while Derek pursued his revolutionary app development venture. At 9:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification that would forever divide my life into before and after. A message from an unknown number with a local area code. No words, just a photo attachment. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment, that strange intuition women develop when something feels off, prickling at the back of my neck. What I saw made my coffee cup slip from my hands, ceramic shattering against the hardwood floor as hot liquid splashed across my bare feet. There was my husband of 4 years, Derek Castellanos, in a compromising position with a woman I didn't recognize. But this wasn't just one photo. As my phone continued to buzz with incoming messages, I realized this was a carefully orchestrated assault on my sanity. 65 photos. I counted them as they arrived, each one more explicit than the last. Each timestamp revealing this had been going on for months. The woman, a stunning brunette with perfectly contoured makeup and an obvious taste for expensive lingerie, had documented their affair with the precision of a professional photographer. Hotel rooms I recognized from Derek's business trips to the neighboring city of Westfield. The conference room of his startup office after hours. Even our favorite restaurant, Cafe Luna, where they sat in the same booth Derek and I had claimed for our anniversary dinners. But it was the final message that revealed her true intention. Thought you should know what your husband really thinks of you. He says you're boring, predictable, and have no ambition. Guess he needed a real woman. XOXO. Natasha. I stared at the name. Natasha. After 4 years of marriage, Derek had never mentioned anyone named Natasha. But as I scrolled through the photos with forensic attention to detail, pieces began falling into place. The background of one photo showed a business card on the nightstand. Natasha Meridian, lifestyle influencer and brand consultant. Another photo captured her designer handbag with a distinctive gold charm that I now remembered seeing on Derek's Instagram stories, always strategically cropped to show just the edge of an expensive accessory. My hands were shaking as the full scope of their cruelty became clear. This wasn't just an affair, it was a coordinated campaign to humiliate me. The photos were meant to break me, to send me running to Derek in tears, to make me the hysterical wife who couldn't handle the truth about her inadequate marriage. Natasha wanted me destroyed, probably so she could swoop in as the sophisticated upgrade to his boring suburban life. For exactly 17 minutes, I sat on my office floor surrounded by shattered ceramic and cooling coffee. Feeling like my world had imploded, I cried, I raged. I felt the familiar whisper of self-doubt that Derek had been cultivating for years. Maybe I was boring, maybe I was predictable, maybe I wasn't enough. But then something else emerged from the wreckage of my shock. Something cold and calculating that I hadn't felt since my college days, when I'd been the top student in my digital communications program before Derek convinced me that supporting his dreams was more important than pursuing my own ambitions. I picked up my phone and looked at those photos again, but this time through a completely different lens. Not as a devastated wife, but as someone who'd spent the last 2 years building social media campaigns, studying viral marketing techniques, and understanding exactly how information spreads in our hyper-connected world. Natasha Meridian had just handed me the most powerful ammunition imaginable. She thought she was destroying me with evidence of Derek's betrayal, but what she'd actually done was provide me with 65 pieces of evidence of her own moral bankruptcy. High-resolution photos that clearly showed her face, timestamps that proved the systematic nature of their affair, and a digital trail that connected her to deliberate home-wrecking behavior. As I carefully saved each photo to a secure cloud drive, my mind was already working through the possibilities. Natasha was a lifestyle influencer and brand consultant, which meant her entire career depended on her public image and reputation. She lived in the spotlight, curating a perfect online persona of success, sophistication, and moral superiority. Her Instagram feed was full of inspirational quotes about authentic living and empowering women, while her LinkedIn profile showcased her work with family-owned businesses and ethical brands. She had built her entire professional identity on being trustworthy, aspirational, and morally sound. What would happen to that carefully constructed image if the internet discovered she was systematically documenting her affair with a married man, and then sending those explicit photos to his wife as a psychological weapon? The answer was obvious, and it made me smile for the first time since 9:47 a.m. I spent the next hour methodically documenting everything. Screenshots of Natasha's social media profiles, archives of her professional websites, screen recordings of her inspirational Instagram stories about supporting other women and building authentic relationships. Business registrations showing her client list included several companies that specifically marketed themselves as family-friendly and values-driven. By noon, I had assembled a comprehensive digital portfolio of who Natasha Meridian claimed to be versus who she actually was. The contrast was going to be devastating. But I wasn't going to rush this. Derek wouldn't be home until evening, and Natasha clearly thought she had all the power in this situation. She was probably expecting me to call Derek sobbing, or maybe show up at her apartment creating a scene she could record and use to further humiliate me. Instead, I was going to give her exactly what she'd given me, a carefully planned surprise that would change everything. As I cleaned up the shattered coffee cup and changed into something more professional, I felt a strange calm settling over me. The same kind of clarity I imagined generals felt when they finally saw the battlefield clearly and realized they held all the strategic advantages. Natasha Meridian had started a war she didn't understand against an opponent she'd completely underestimated. She thought she was destroying a boring suburban housewife. She was about to discover she'd targeted a digital marketing strategist who'd been waiting years for the perfect campaign to showcase her talents. And tomorrow, the entire internet was going to know exactly who Natasha Meridian really was. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first thing people don't understand about executing perfect revenge is that emotion is your enemy. For the next 6 hours, I moved through my house with the methodical precision of someone who had finally found their true calling. The tears had stopped. The shaking had subsided. What remained was something far more dangerous than a broken-hearted wife, a digital marketing strategist with nothing left to lose, and a skill set that Natasha Meridian had unknowingly handed the perfect opportunity to showcase. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee, this time using our good china, the set Derek's mother had given us for our wedding that we'd been saving for special occasions. Today felt special enough. Then I settled back into my home office and began what would become the most important campaign of my career. The strange calm that had settled over me wasn't numbness. It was focus. The kind of razor-sharp clarity that comes when years of suppressed professional instincts suddenly align with personal necessity. For 2 years, I'd been building social media strategies for local bakeries and boutique shops, small campaigns that Derek had dismissed as playing on the computer. He had no idea I'd been studying viral marketing psychology, analyzing engagement algorithms, and building a network of micro-influencers who trusted my strategic insights. Derek thought I was just the supportive wife who handled our household social media and occasionally helped his startup with their basic marketing needs. He had never bothered to ask about the digital marketing certification I'd completed online, or the advanced analytics courses I'd been taking during his business trips to Westfield. To him, I was background support, not a strategic threat. That assumption was about to cost him everything. I opened my laptop and created a new project folder, Operation Authenticity. The irony of the name wasn't lost on me. Natasha had built her entire brand around authentic living while conducting the most inauthentic relationship imaginable. But this campaign wasn't going to be driven by spite or emotion. It was going to be surgical, professional, and absolutely devastating in its precision. First, I needed intelligence. Real intelligence, not just the surface-level information Natasha had inadvertently provided in her 65 photos. I spent the next 2 hours conducting what I like to call ethical stalking, the kind of comprehensive digital research that any competent marketer would do before launching a campaign targeting a specific demographic. Natasha's digital footprint was extensive and, thankfully, remarkably unguarded. Her Instagram account boasted 47,000 followers, mostly women aged 25 to 45, who followed her for lifestyle inspiration and career advice. Her LinkedIn showed impressive client testimonials from family-owned businesses, ethical brands, and companies that specifically marketed themselves on integrity and traditional values. Her professional website featured a blog where she wrote extensively about empowering women to live authentically and, quote, building meaningful relationships based on trust. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Here was a woman who had built a career advising other women on authentic living while systematically documenting her affair with a married man, and then weaponizing those images to psychologically torture his wife. The gap between her public persona and private behavior wasn't just hypocritical, it was a masterclass in brand vulnerability. But I needed more than just public profiles. I needed to understand her ecosystem, her engagement patterns, her most devoted followers, and most importantly, her professional dependencies. Using analytics tools I'd been quietly mastering while Derek thought I was playing around online, I began mapping Natasha's digital influence network. Her top engagement came from followers who shared content about female empowerment, authentic living, and supporting other women. Her comment sections were filled with women thanking her for inspiration during difficult times, praising her for being a quote, model, and seeking advice about relationships and self-worth. Many of her followers were wives and mothers who looked to Natasha as an example of successful, ethical womanhood. The targeting couldn't have been more perfect if I'd designed it myself. Next, I analyzed her client base. Natasha's professional success depended on businesses trusting her to represent their values authentically. Her client roster included Harmony Home Goods, tagline Building Stronger Families, Pure Heart Wellness, focused on holistic lifestyle choices, and Legacy Financial Planning, specializing in family wealth preservation. These companies had hired her specifically because her brand represented trustworthiness, integrity, and family values. Every single one of those partnerships would evaporate the moment their customers discovered what Natasha Meridian really did in her spare time. By 3 p.m., I had assembled a comprehensive strategic analysis that would have impressed any Fortune 500 marketing department. I understood Natasha's audience psychology, her professional vulnerabilities, her engagement patterns, and her revenue dependencies. More importantly, I had identified the perfect narrative framework for maximum viral impact. But I wasn't ready to act yet. The most successful viral campaigns aren't rushed. They're timed for optimal impact and structured for sustained engagement. I needed to think beyond just exposing Natasha's hypocrisy. I needed to create something that would transform this personal betrayal into a professional opportunity for myself. That's when the real brilliance of my situation became clear. I wasn't just going to destroy Natasha's reputation. I was going to use her destruction to launch my own career in a way that would establish me as the most sought-after digital marketing strategist in 3 counties. I opened a new document and began outlining what would become the case study that would define my professional future. How one woman's betrayal became another woman's breakthrough, a masterclass in crisis communications and strategic response. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Phase 1 would expose Natasha's hypocrisy in a way that maximized viral spread while maintaining legal and ethical high ground. Phase 2 would position my response as a case study in strategic communications, demonstrating my professional capabilities to potential clients. Phase 3 would leverage the attention from phases 1 and 2 to launch my own digital marketing agency with national visibility. Natasha thought she was ending my marriage. Instead, she was about to launch my career. I leaned back in my office chair, looking out the window at the quiet suburban street where Derek and I had planned to build our future together. Those plans were over, but something far more exciting was beginning. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Not Derek's supportive wife or the background character in someone else's story, but the strategic, ambitious woman I'd been before I'd convinced myself that dimming my own light would somehow make his shine brighter. At 4:17 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Working late again tonight. Big breakthrough with the app. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, probably sent while he was with Natasha, and felt nothing but gratitude. His betrayal had just given me the perfect opportunity to reclaim everything I'd sacrificed for a man who'd never deserved it in the first place. Tomorrow morning, Natasha Meridian would wake up to discover that sending those photos had been the worst mistake of her life. But tonight, I had work to do. The kind of strategic, brilliant work I'd been born to do. The calm I felt wasn't the numbness of shock. It was the serenity of someone who had finally remembered exactly how powerful they really were. By 7 p.m., I was deep in execution mode when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my neighbor and closest friend, Riley Patterson, holding a bottle of wine and wearing the expression of someone who'd been rehearsing a difficult conversation. Riley lived 3 houses down with her husband Marcus and their twin daughters, and she had the uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong in our quiet neighborhood. "I brought reinforcements," she said, holding up the wine as I opened the door. "You've been unusually quiet today, and your car hasn't moved since this morning. Plus, I saw Derek leave for work this morning, but his car was already gone when I walked the girls to school, which means he never came home last night." This was classic Riley, observant, direct, and impossible to deceive. As the head of Emergency Services Coordination for Millbrook Heights Hospital, she'd developed an almost supernatural ability to read situations and people. Her job required her to assess crisis scenarios rapidly and coordinate complex responses under pressure, skills that made her both an invaluable friend and occasionally an uncomfortable mirror. I hesitated for a moment, considering how much to share. Riley knew Derek better than most of our friends. She'd witnessed his gradual transformation from the charming man I'd married into someone increasingly dismissive of my opinions and contributions. She'd also been the one person who'd consistently encouraged my digital marketing side projects, often asking why I wasn't pursuing them more aggressively. "Something happened today," I said finally, stepping aside to let her in. "Something that's going to change everything." Riley set the wine on my kitchen counter and studied my face with the same intensity she probably used to assess incoming trauma patients. "You look different," she observed. "Not upset different, focused different, like you've made a decision about something important." I found myself smiling at her perceptiveness. "You could say that." "Derek?" she asked simply. "Derek, and someone named Natasha Meridian." Riley's eyebrows shot up. "The lifestyle influencer? I follow her on Instagram. She's always posting about authentic relationships and supporting other women." A pause as understanding dawned. Oh no. "Oh, yes." I poured us each a glass of wine and gave Riley the abbreviated version of the day's events. watching her expression shift from sympathy to outrage to something approaching professional admiration as I described my strategic response plan. "You've been planning a campaign this entire afternoon?" she asked, leaning against my kitchen island. Most people would be calling divorce lawyers or confronting their cheating husband. You're building a marketing strategy. Most people don't have my skill set, I replied, and most people don't get handed such perfect source material by their enemies. Riley was quiet for a moment, swirling wine in her glass. When she looked up, her expression was calculating. I've been watching you for the past 2 years, building these incredible social media campaigns for local businesses, studying marketing analytics like you're preparing for the Olympics. I kept wondering why someone with your capabilities was limiting herself to small-scale projects. Derek thought, Riley interrupted, that keeping you small made him look bigger. I've seen it before, unfortunately. Smart, ambitious women who convince themselves that supporting mediocre men is more important than developing their own potential. The assessment was harsh but accurate. Riley had never been one to soften difficult truths, which was exactly why her perspective was valuable right now. "What I don't understand," she continued, "is why you're still being strategic about this instead of just burning everything down. If someone sent me 65 explicit photos of my husband with another woman, I'd be posting them on every social media platform before dinner." "That's exactly why my approach will be more effective," I explained. "Emotional responses are predictable and easy to dismiss. But strategic responses? Those create lasting consequences." Riley nodded slowly. "Show me." I led her to my home office, where my laptop displayed the comprehensive analysis I'd been building all afternoon. Riley moved behind my chair, studying the screens with professional interest as I walked her through Natasha's digital footprint, audience psychology, and professional vulnerabilities. "This is sophisticated work," she said after several minutes. "This isn't revenge planning. This is advanced strategic communications. Where did you learn to do analysis at this level?" "Online courses, mostly. Advanced digital marketing certification programs. I've been studying viral psychology, engagement algorithms, crisis communications theory." Derek thought I was just playing around on the computer during his business trips. "His business trips?" Riley repeated dryly. "The ones where he was actually in hotel rooms with Miss Authentic Living herself." "The irony is almost perfect," I agreed. Riley circled my desk, examining the multiple screens I had open, analytics dashboards, social media monitoring tools, competitive analysis frameworks. "You've basically built a war room in your spare bedroom," she observed. "This looks like the kind of setup our crisis management team uses at the hospital when we're coordinating major emergency responses." "The principles are similar. Assess the situation, identify all stakeholders, understand the information flow patterns, plan strategic interventions for maximum impact." "And you've been doing this level of work for local bakeries and boutique shops?" Riley shook her head. "That's like using a fighter jet to deliver pizzas." Her analogy made me laugh, but it also highlighted something I'd been gradually recognizing throughout the day. This situation wasn't just revealing Derek and Natasha's betrayal. It was revealing the extent to which I'd been underutilizing my own capabilities. The strategic thinking, analytical frameworks, and execution planning I was applying to this crisis represented skills I'd been developing quietly for years but never fully deploying. "I think," Riley said carefully, "that Natasha Meridian just did you the biggest favor of your life." "How do you figure?" "She forced you to stop playing small." Riley gestured at my setup. "Look at this operation. This is the work of someone who should be running strategic communications for major corporations, not optimizing Instagram posts for cupcake shops. She made you angry enough to finally use your real capabilities." The observation hit with unexpected force. Riley was right. I'd been operating at maybe 15% of my actual capacity, telling myself I was being supportive when I was really being afraid. Afraid of outshining Derek, afraid of seeming too ambitious, afraid of claiming space that felt too big for the diminished version of myself I'd become. "There's something else," Riley continued, her voice taking on the tone she used when delivering difficult medical assessments. "I've been watching Derek for months, seeing how he talks to you, how he dismisses your ideas, how he minimizes your contributions. This affair isn't surprising. It's consistent with someone who fundamentally doesn't respect his partner. You think he's been planning to leave anyway? I think he's been positioning himself to leave while making it look like your fault. The gradual undermining, the dismissiveness, the way he's been setting up this narrative that you're not ambitious or interesting enough for him." Riley paused. "Natasha sending you those photos wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was strategic. They wanted you to discover the affair in the most humiliating way possible, so you'd react emotionally and give them justification for whatever they were planning next." The analysis crystallized something I'd been sensing but hadn't fully articulated. This wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated campaign to destabilize me emotionally while positioning Derek as the victim of a marriage that had simply run its course. "They underestimated who they were dealing with," I said quietly. "Spectacularly," Riley agreed. "They thought they were manipulating a suburban housewife. They're about to discover they've been playing psychological warfare with someone who actually understands how information spreads and influence works." She moved back to my computer screens, studying the campaign framework I'd been developing. "When do you execute?" "Tomorrow morning. I want to time it for maximum engagement. Late enough that people are awake and checking social media, early enough that it has all day to spread, before Natasha can mount any kind of damage control response." Riley nodded approvingly. "And Derek?" "Derek will discover everything the same way everyone else does, through social media." "Perfect." Riley raised her wine glass. "To strategic thinking and the idiots who underestimate it." As we clinked glasses, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The validation of having someone witness my capabilities and recognize their full scope. Riley wasn't just supporting my decision, she was confirming what I'd begun to suspect throughout this surreal day. I wasn't just planning revenge against Natasha and Derek. I was reclaiming the ambitious, strategic version of myself that I'd gradually surrendered over 4 years of marriage to someone who'd never deserved her in the first place. Tomorrow, the internet would discover who Natasha Meridian really was. But more importantly, I was finally remembering who I really was. At 11:30 p.m., just as Riley was preparing to leave and I was finalizing my campaign timeline, my phone exploded with notifications. Not the steady buzz of regular messages, but the rapid-fire ping of someone sending multiple files in quick succession. My stomach clenched as I recognized the number. Natasha Meridian wasn't finished with her psychological warfare. This time, she'd escalated beyond explicit photos. The first message contained a video file, 37 seconds of Derek, in what I recognized as Natasha's bedroom, speaking directly to her camera with the casual intimacy of someone completely comfortable in that space. His words made my blood run cold. "She'll never leave me, you know," Derek was saying, his voice carrying the same tone he used when discussing a particularly stubborn piece of code. "She's too dependent, too scared of being alone. I could probably move you into the house and she'd just adjust around it." He laughed, the sound ugly in its casual cruelty. 4 years of marriage and she still thinks I'm going to suddenly appreciate her little computer projects. It's actually kind of pathetic. Riley, who had been gathering her things, froze at the sound coming from my phone. "Is that Derek talking about me to his girlfriend?" My voice sounded remarkably steady considering the rage building in my chest. The second video was worse. Natasha herself this time, speaking to the camera while getting dressed in what appeared to be the same hotel room from several of the earlier photos. Her tone was conversational, almost clinical, as if she were discussing a business strategy rather than destroying someone's marriage. "The wife thing is honestly getting tedious," she said, applying lipstick with practiced precision. "Derek keeps saying he'll handle it, but he's too much of a coward to just end it cleanly, so I'm going to speed up the process," she smiled at her reflection. "A few strategic photo dumps, some carefully timed revelations, and she'll either leave him or have a complete breakdown. Either way, Derek gets what he wants without having to be the bad guy." Riley had moved behind me, reading over my shoulder as more messages arrived. Screenshots of Derek's text conversations with Natasha, dating back 8 months. Messages where he described me as, quote, "clingy, unambitious, and boring in bed." Screenshots of social media posts where Natasha had been subtly mocking me for months, sharing inspirational quotes about women who settle for mediocrity and wives who hold their husbands back from greatness. But the cruelest revelation was a planning document Natasha had apparently created, titled Project Liberation, Timeline for Dee's Transition. It was a month-by-month strategy for pushing me toward a breakdown, while positioning Derek as the patient husband finally freed from an inadequate marriage. The document included specific tactics: gradual social isolation, professional dismissiveness, and strategic infidelity revelation for maximum emotional impact. The final message was a voice memo from Natasha, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "I really hope you understand that this isn't personal. Derek deserves to be with someone who matches his ambition and sophistication. You're a nice person, but you're not enough for a man like him. The sooner you accept that and move on, the easier this will be for everyone involved." The sheer, calculated cruelty of it all was breathtaking. This wasn't just an affair that had gotten out of hand. It was a systematic campaign designed to destroy my self-worth while giving Derek plausible deniability about the end of our marriage. They had been collaborating for months to make me feel inadequate, isolated, and ultimately disposable. Riley's face had gone pale as she processed what we were seeing. "This is sociopathic," she said quietly. "They've been gaslighting you for months while planning your psychological destruction." What struck me most wasn't the betrayal itself. I'd already processed that reality earlier in the day. It was the professional sophistication of their manipulation campaign. Natasha had approached the destruction of my marriage with the same strategic thinking she probably applied to her marketing clients. Every interaction, every undermining comment from Derek, every social media post designed to make me feel inferior, it had all been orchestrated with deliberate precision. "She's good," I said, surprising myself with the observation. "This is actually brilliant psychological manipulation. The gradual erosion of self-worth, the isolation tactics, the timing of revelations for maximum impact. If I were her marketing professor, I'd give this an A+ for strategic execution." Riley stared at me. "Are you actually analyzing their psychological warfare campaign like it's a case study?" "I'm analyzing it because understanding their strategy helps me counter it more effectively. I was already screenshotting everything, organizing the new evidence into folders within my broader campaign framework. They think they're dealing with someone who'll crumble under this kind of systematic pressure. They've built their entire plan around the assumption that I'm weak, dependent, and emotionally fragile. And instead, they've just provided me with documented evidence of premeditated psychological abuse that will make my response look completely justified to any reasonable observer." I was typing rapidly now, updating my strategic framework with this new intelligence. Natasha just shifted the narrative from "bitter wife gets revenge" to, quote, "abuse victim fights back" with documented evidence. The more I studied their approach, the more I realized how perfectly it was going to backfire. Natasha's entire professional brand was built on empowering women and authentic relationships. The discovery that she had been systematically orchestrating another woman's psychological destruction while documenting the process for her own entertainment would be absolutely devastating to her credibility. Derek's casual cruelty in those videos would resonate particularly badly with Natasha's female-dominated audience. Women who followed her for inspiration about relationships and self-worth would be horrified to discover she had been collaborating with a married man to destroy his wife's mental health for their mutual convenience. They've made this so much easier for me, I realized aloud. I was planning to expose Natasha's hypocrisy, but now I have evidence of actual predatory behavior. This isn't just about her sleeping with a married man. It's about her systematically destroying another woman for entertainment. Riley was still processing the scope of what we'd discovered. "The planning document," she said slowly. "She actually created a timeline for psychologically destroying you. That's not an affair, that's abuse." "Documented abuse," I corrected. "With timestamps, strategic objectives, and measurable outcomes." She approached the destruction of my mental health like a professional project. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Natasha. "Hope you're enjoying the full picture now. Derek and I are heading to Cabo next week to celebrate his freedom. Try not to do anything embarrassing while we're gone." The casual cruelty was stunning, but it also revealed something important about Natasha's psychology. She genuinely believed she had won. The message wasn't just meant to hurt me. It was a victory lap, the kind of gloating that people do when they're absolutely certain they've defeated their opponent. "She thinks it's over," I observed. "She thinks I'm completely broken, and that they can just move on to their new life without consequences." "Are you broken?" Riley asked quietly. I considered the question seriously. 12 hours ago, discovering Derek's affair might have devastated me. The systematic nature of their psychological campaign might have convinced me that I really was as inadequate as they'd been telling me. But something fundamental had shifted in my perspective during the day's strategic planning. "No," I said finally. "I'm angry. I'm disappointed. I'm hurt that someone I trusted could be so deliberately cruel." I paused, organizing my thoughts. "But I'm not broken. If anything, this has clarified exactly who I'm dealing with and exactly what I'm capable of in response." Riley nodded slowly. "You know what's interesting? They spent months trying to convince you that you were weak and dependent. But their entire plan depended on you being exactly that weak and dependent. They never considered what would happen if you weren't." She was right. Derek and Natasha had built their strategy around a version of me that no longer existed, if it ever had. The woman who had spent the afternoon building sophisticated marketing campaigns and strategic communication frameworks wasn't the helpless victim they expected to destroy. "Tomorrow is going to be very educational for them," I said, saving the final pieces of evidence to my secure drives. "They're about to discover that the boring, unambitious wife they've been manipulating is actually someone they should have been very careful not to underestimate." As Riley finally headed home, she paused at my door. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think they just made the worst mistake of their lives." I smiled, feeling more confident than I had in years. They absolutely did. After she left, I sat in my office reviewing everything Natasha had sent, but now with complete emotional detachment. These weren't weapons designed to destroy me. They were evidence that would destroy her. Every cruel video, every manipulative message, every documented strategy for my psychological destruction would become part of the most comprehensive exposure campaign I'd ever designed. Natasha Meridian thought she was delivering the final blow to a defeated opponent. Instead, she had just handed me everything I needed to end her career and launch my own. The woman they had spent months trying to break was about to show them exactly what real strategic thinking looked like. Wednesday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for late October, and I woke at 5:30 a.m. feeling more rested than I had in months. While Derek's side of the bed remained empty, he'd apparently spent another night at Natasha's. I moved through my morning routine with the focused calm of someone about to change everything. At 7:45 a.m., as I was finalizing the last technical details of my campaign launch, Derek finally came home. I heard his key in the front door, followed by the familiar sound of his messenger bag hitting the entryway table. He moved through the house with the casual confidence of someone who believed he held all the cards in our relationship. "Morning," he called from the kitchen, his tone artificially cheerful. "Sorry about staying out again. The development team hit a major breakthrough and we ended up working all night." You know how it is when you're building something revolutionary. I remained in my office, listening to him brew coffee and move around our kitchen as if nothing had changed. Through my doorway, I could see him checking his phone repeatedly, probably coordinating with Natasha about their next steps. The casual nature of his deception was almost impressive in its brazenness. "I'm thinking of taking a vacation," Derek announced, appearing in my office doorway with his coffee mug. "The team deserves a break after this breakthrough, and I could use some time to think about the future. Maybe a week in Mexico." I looked up from my laptop, studying the face of the man I'd been married to for 4 years. Derek was conventionally handsome in the way that had attracted me in college. Tall, lean, with dark hair that he kept perfectly styled and brown eyes that had once seemed warm but now appeared calculating. This morning, there was something different in his expression. Not guilt or anxiety, but anticipation. The look of someone who believed their carefully orchestrated plan was finally coming together. "Mexico sounds nice," I said neutrally. "When were you thinking?" "Actually, pretty soon, maybe this weekend." He leaned against my doorframe with studied casualness. "I know it's short notice, but sometimes you have to seize opportunities when they present themselves." The coded language wasn't even subtle. Derek was telling me about his vacation with Natasha, while maintaining plausible deniability about the true nature of the trip. In his mind, he was being clever, getting everything he wanted while keeping his hands technically clean. "Will you be going alone?" I asked, curious to see how far he'd push the charade. "Well, Natasha might join me. You remember Natasha? She's been helping with some marketing strategy for the app. She knows Cabo really well, and it would be efficient to combine the vacation with some business planning." The audacity was breathtaking. Derek was sitting in our home office, drinking coffee from a mug I'd bought him for our anniversary, casually describing his romantic getaway with his girlfriend while positioning it as a business trip. He wasn't just betraying our marriage, he was insulting my intelligence in the process. "That sounds very efficient," I agreed, returning my attention to my laptop screen. Derek seemed pleased with my lack of reaction. "You could use the time to think, too," he suggested, his tone taking on the slightly condescending quality I'd grown to despise. "About what you want to do next. Maybe explore some of those little marketing projects more seriously. Find something that really fulfills you." I almost laughed at the transparent manipulation. Derek was positioning himself as the supportive husband, encouraging my independence while actually setting up the narrative for our divorce. When he returned from vacation with Natasha, he'd probably suggest that our time apart had shown them both how much happier they were without the constraints of our marriage. "I've actually been thinking a lot about my future," I said truthfully, "about what I'm really capable of when I stop limiting myself." "That's great to hear," Derek replied, completely missing the edge in my voice. "I've always said you have potential, you just need to find the right outlet for it." The patronizing comment crystallized everything wrong with our relationship dynamic. Derek had spent years positioning himself as the visionary, while relegating me to the role of support staff in my own life. Even now, as he prepared to abandon our marriage for his strategically planned upgrade, he couldn't resist one final display of superiority. My phone buzzed with a text notification. Derek glanced at it curiously, probably wondering if Natasha was getting impatient with their timeline. Instead, it was a message from Riley. "Saw Derek's car in the driveway. How are you holding up?" "Just a friend checking in," I said, noting Derek's momentary tension. He was probably worried that I'd been confiding in people about our marriage problems, which could complicate his narrative about our mutual decision to separate. "You know," Derek continued, settling into the conversation with renewed confidence, "I've been thinking that maybe we should talk, really talk, about where we are and where we're going." Here it was, the conversation Natasha had probably coached him through. The careful, considerate discussion where Derek would express his concerns about our compatibility while positioning himself as the reluctant victim of a marriage that had simply run its course. "I'm listening," I said, curious to see how sophisticated their psychological manipulation had become. Derek took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for a difficult but necessary conversation. "I feel like we've been growing apart lately. Like we want different things from life. He paused, probably gauging my reaction. I love you, but I'm not sure we're right for each other anymore. You're such a good person, but you deserve someone who appreciates the simple things you value. And I need someone who shares my ambition, who can keep up with the kind of life I'm building. The script was flawless in its cruel efficiency. Derek was simultaneously complimenting me and dismissing me, expressing love while explaining why that love wasn't enough, and positioning our divorce as an act of kindness toward both of us. Most devastatingly, he was framing my supposed limitations as the primary problem while presenting himself as the reluctant but realistic partner who'd finally accepted our incompatibility. You've given this a lot of thought, I observed. I have, and I hope, that deep down you feel the same way, that we both deserve to be with people who truly understand us. Derek was good at this, I had to admit. The conversation felt organic despite being obviously rehearsed. He was giving me an opening to agree with him, to participate in the narrative of mutual recognition that our marriage had run its course. In his mind, this was the perfect setup. I would either agree and make the divorce easy, or I would get emotional and make myself look irrational, justifying his decision to leave. I think you're right, I said finally. We do both deserve to be with people who truly understand us. Derek's relief was visible. I'm glad you see it that way. I was worried you might take this as rejection, but it's really about finding the right fit for both of us. Absolutely. No hard feelings. Just two people who've outgrown each other. Exactly. Derek was practically beaming now, probably amazed at how smoothly his exit strategy was working. So you'd be okay with me taking some time to explore other possibilities? I mean, eventually, when we're both ready? I almost applauded the performance. Derek was asking permission to continue his affair, while positioning it as a thoughtful exploration of post-marriage possibilities. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated enough to make me wonder if Natasha had professional training in persuasion techniques. I think that makes perfect sense, I agreed. In fact, I've been exploring some new possibilities myself lately. Derek's expression flickered with brief uncertainty. New possibilities? Professional possibilities. Turns out I've been dramatically underestimating my own capabilities for years. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you stop limiting yourself to other people's expectations. That's wonderful, Derek said, though his tone carried a note of confusion. This wasn't quite the response he'd scripted for. What kind of professional possibilities? Digital marketing strategy, crisis communications, building viral campaigns. I've been studying advanced techniques for months, and I'm finally ready to put them into practice. Derek nodded enthusiastically, clearly relieved to redirect the conversation toward my little computer projects that he could safely dismiss. That sounds like a great hobby to explore, very therapeutic. Oh, it's much more than a hobby now, I said, smiling genuinely for the first time in our conversation. I'm launching something today that's going to establish me as a premier strategic communications specialist. A case study that will probably become legendary in digital marketing circles. Today? Derek looked puzzled. What kind of case study? I glanced at my laptop screen, where the countdown timer showed less than 2 hours until launch. A demonstration of how to turn personal betrayal into professional opportunity. How to transform someone else's cruelty into your own career breakthrough. Derek was staring at me with growing unease, probably sensing that something was fundamentally different about this conversation than what he'd planned. That sounds interesting. It's going to be extraordinary, I assured him. The subject matter is particularly compelling. A lifestyle influencer who built her brand on authentic relationships and supporting other women, while secretly orchestrating the psychological destruction of a married woman for her own entertainment. Derek had gone very still. What are you talking about? I turned my laptop screen toward him, displaying Natasha's Instagram profile alongside the strategic analysis I'd been building. Project Authenticity. A comprehensive case study in strategic response to coordinated psychological manipulation. I think it's going to get a lot of attention. Derek's coffee mug slipped from his hand, hitting the hardwood floor with a crash that sent ceramic shards skittering across my office. His face had drained of all color as he stared at the evidence of his affair organized into professional marketing frameworks. "Where did you get those photos?" he whispered. "Natasha sent them to me yesterday, along with videos, planning documents, and a detailed timeline of your joint strategy to destroy my mental health." I closed the laptop calmly. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Or did you just assume I'd be too broken to do anything strategic about it?" Derek was backing toward my office door, his confident facade completely shattered. "You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like." "Actually," I said, standing up and straightening my blazer, "this is exactly what it looks like, and in about 90 minutes, everyone else is going to see it too." The look of absolute panic in Derek's eyes as he realized his perfectly orchestrated plan had just become his worst nightmare was almost worth 4 years of diminished expectations and casual disrespect. Almost. Derek was still staring at me in shock when my phone alarm chimed at exactly 9 a.m. The sound was soft, almost delicate, but it marked the beginning of the most important hour of my professional life. I had spent 18 months studying optimal timing for viral content launches, analyzing engagement patterns across demographics, and understanding the psychology of information spread. Every piece of research had led to this moment. "I need you to leave," I said calmly, not looking up from my laptop as I began the final sequence of my campaign launch. "I have work to do." "You can't be serious about this," Derek said, his voice taking on the edge of desperation I'd heard when his app development hit major roadblocks. "Whatever you think you know, we can work this out. People make mistakes. Marriages go through rough patches." I glanced up at him with genuine curiosity. "Do you actually believe that what you and Natasha did was a mistake? Or a rough patch?" Derek opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling to find an angle that might work. The confident man who had walked into my office 30 minutes ago had been replaced by someone I barely recognized, pale, sweating slightly, and frantically calculating his options. "Look," he tried again, "Natasha can be dramatic. Whatever she sent you, she was probably trying to make it seem worse than it actually was. You know how women can be when they're what, Derek?" My voice had gone dangerously quiet. "When they're systematically documenting their psychological warfare against another woman? When they're creating strategic timelines for emotional destruction? When they're filming themselves talking about how pathetic and dependent their target is?" Derek flinched at each description, but I could see him trying to rebuild his composure. This was Derek's standard operating procedure. When caught in a lie, he would attempt to minimize, redirect, and ultimately convince me that my perception of reality was somehow flawed. "You're taking everything out of context," he said, gaining confidence as he fell back into familiar patterns. Natasha was venting, and sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're frustrated. "And the photos? Okay, yes, we've been seeing each other, but it's not the deliberate campaign you're making it out to be." I saved my work and stood up, moving to the window where I could see the quiet suburban street where we'd pretended to build a life together. "Derek, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because this is the last conversation we're ever going to have as married people." Something in my tone made him stop his defensive rambling. "I have 65 explicit photos that Natasha sent to me with deliberate cruelty. I have videos of both of you discussing your strategy to break my mental health. I have documented evidence of your 8-month affair and the systematic way you've been undermining my self-worth to justify your planned departure. I have screenshots of your text conversations where you describe me as pathetic and clingy. And I have a strategic planning document where Natasha outlined her timeline for destroying me." Derek's face had gone ashen, but I continued with clinical precision. "More importantly, I have spent the last 20 hours building the most comprehensive digital marketing campaign of my career. In 53 minutes, Every piece of evidence of your psychological abuse will be distributed across social media platforms with strategic timing for maximum viral impact. The campaign includes detailed analysis of Natasha's professional hypocrisy, documented proof of coordinated manipulation, and a case study in how to respond to betrayal with professional excellence rather than emotional breakdown. "You can't do that," Derek whispered. "That's private information. You could face legal consequences." I almost smiled at his desperation. "Actually, Derek, I've been very careful about legal implications. Everything I'm sharing was sent to me directly by Natasha, which means I have legal possession of the materials. Her decision to document and distribute evidence of your affair removes any reasonable expectation of privacy. And since she chose to use those materials as weapons against me, I'm simply redirecting them toward a more appropriate target." Derek slumped against my office doorframe, the reality of his situation finally penetrating his defensive mechanisms. "Why are you doing this? If you want a divorce, we can handle it quietly. There's no need to destroy people's lives." The question revealed so much about how Derek fundamentally misunderstood both the situation and me. He genuinely believed that his betrayal was a private matter that should be resolved discreetly, with minimal consequences for his comfort or reputation. The idea that actions might have proportional responses was apparently foreign to him. "I'm not destroying anyone's life, Derek. I'm revealing who people actually are beneath the personas they've constructed." I turned back to my laptop, where the campaign dashboard showed everything ready for deployment. Natasha built her career on authenticity and supporting other women. Her audience deserves to know that she spends her free time systematically destroying other women for entertainment. "But what about me?" Derek asked, and the self-centered focus of the question was so characteristic that I almost laughed. "What about you? You're a cheating husband who collaborated with his girlfriend to psychologically abuse his wife. You spent months making me feel inadequate and unworthy while planning your exit strategy. You documented your contempt for me and shared it with someone who was actively working to damage my mental health." I paused, letting the weight of his actions settle between us. "You are who you are, Derek. I'm just making sure people know it." Derek was quiet for a long moment, probably trying to process the scope of consequences he was facing. "People will think you're vindictive," he said finally. "They'll say you're just a bitter ex-wife getting revenge." "Some people might think that initially," I agreed. "But the beauty of documenting everything is that the evidence speaks for itself. When people see Natasha's planning document for my psychological destruction, when they watch videos of you casually discussing how pathetic I am, when they understand the systematic nature of your manipulation campaign, the narrative becomes very clear." I checked the time, 47 minutes until launch. "Besides," I continued, "this isn't just about exposing what you did. It's about demonstrating what I'm capable of in response. This campaign will establish me as a strategic communications specialist who can handle crisis situations with professional excellence. Your betrayal is becoming my career breakthrough." Derek stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. "You're different," he said slowly. "This isn't the woman I married." "You're absolutely right," I replied. "The woman you married was someone who accepted your limitations as her own, someone who made herself smaller so you could feel bigger, someone who convinced herself that supporting your mediocrity was more important than developing her own excellence." I moved back to my desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard that would change everything. "That woman is gone, Derek. What you're looking at now is who I actually am when I stop pretending to be less than I am. And frankly, you should have been very careful about threatening someone with my capabilities." Derek made one last desperate attempt. "If you do this, there's no going back. Our marriage will be over. Everyone will know everything." I looked at him directly, this man who had spent 4 years systematically diminishing my sense of self-worth while building his exit strategy with another woman. "Derek, our marriage ended the moment you and Natasha decided I was disposable. I'm just making sure the ending is on my terms instead of yours." My finger moved to the enter key. Now get out of my house, I have a career to launch." Derek stood frozen for a moment longer, perhaps finally understanding that the woman he thought he could manipulate and discard had never existed in the first place. Then he turned and walked out of my office, out of our house, and out of my life. I heard the front door close and Derek's car start in the driveway. Through my window, I watched him drive away, probably racing to warn Natasha that their perfect plan had just become their perfect disaster. I turned back to my laptop, where the campaign dashboard showed 39 minutes until launch. Everything was ready. The content strategically formatted for maximum engagement, the timing optimized for viral spread, the narrative frameworks designed to maintain audience investment while delivering justice. For the first time in years, I felt completely, authentically myself, not Derek's supporting wife, not the diminished version of myself I'd become through years of psychological manipulation, but the strategic, ambitious, brilliantly capable woman I had always been underneath. Natasha Meridian had spent months planning my destruction. In 39 minutes, she was going to discover what professional-level strategic planning actually looked like. At 9:47 a.m. exactly, the same minute Natasha had sent me that first devastating photo just 24 hours earlier, I pressed enter and launched the campaign that would redefine both our lives. The timing wasn't coincidental, it was strategic poetry. The first post went live on my personal LinkedIn profile, which I had been carefully building for months, while Derek dismissed my quote. The post began simply. Yesterday, I discovered that someone had spent 8 months systematically documenting their affair with my husband, then sent me 65 explicit photos hoping to destroy my mental health. Today I'm launching my digital marketing consultancy with a case study in strategic crisis response. Let me reintroduce myself. Within 30 seconds, the post had its first like. Within 2 minutes, the first comment appeared, "Holy shit, this is about to be legendary." By minute 5, it had been shared 7 times. I watched the engagement metrics climb with the satisfaction of someone whose expertise was finally being demonstrated on the scale it deserved. But LinkedIn was just the foundation. The real campaign was orchestrated across multiple platforms simultaneously, each with content optimized for its specific audience psychology. My Twitter thread began, Thread, how to turn betrayal into business opportunity, a masterclass in strategic communications. Buckle up, this is about to get wild. Instagram featured a carousel post with professional headshots I had taken months ago, paired with the caption, "Meet the real me," not just Derek Castellanos' wife, but a digital marketing strategist with advanced certifications in viral psychology, crisis communications, and strategic narrative development. Here's what happens when you underestimate the wrong woman. Each platform fed into the others, creating a comprehensive digital ecosystem that demonstrated exactly the kind of sophisticated marketing strategy I'd been developing while Derek thought I was just playing on the computer. The content wasn't just about exposing Natasha and Derek. It was about introducing the professional version of myself that had been hidden for 4 years. The centerpiece was a professionally designed infographic titled Anatomy of Authenticity, a case study in brand vulnerability. Using anonymous data points that didn't directly name Natasha but made her identity unmistakable to anyone who followed lifestyle influencers, I demonstrated how a personal brand built on supporting women could be destroyed by evidence of systematically targeting another woman for psychological destruction. The infographic was a masterpiece of strategic communication, devastating to Natasha while showcasing my analytical capabilities to potential clients. It included metrics on audience trust, engagement authenticity scores, and projected reputation recovery timelines that demonstrated both my technical expertise and my understanding of digital psychology. By 10:15 a.m., my phone was buzzing with notifications faster than I could read them. Comments were pouring in from marketing professionals I'd been quietly networking with for months, business owners whose campaigns I'd optimized, and women who recognized the sophisticated nature of what I'd accomplished. "This is brilliant strategic thinking," commented Sarah Chen, a senior VP at a major advertising agency. The way you've transformed personal crisis into professional demonstration is exactly the kind of innovative thinking our industry needs. As a woman in business, I'm in awe of how you've handled this, wrote Dr. Jennifer Walsh, whose wellness brand I'd helped develop social media strategy for the previous year. You didn't just survive their attack, you used it to showcase capabilities they never imagined you possessed. But the most satisfying responses came from Natasha's own followers, who were beginning to connect the anonymous case study details with her brand. Someone had screenshot portions of my analysis and shared them with the comment, "Wait, is this about Natasha Meridian?" The timeline matches her posting patterns, and those audience demographics are exactly her follower base. Within an hour, #AuthenicityCase was trending locally, with social media users dissecting the case study and speculating about the unnamed influencer's identity. The engagement was organic and explosive. Exactly what happens when professionally crafted content meets genuine audience investment in justice and authenticity. At 11:30 a.m., my personal phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. I answered with the professional tone I'd been practicing for exactly this moment. "Strategic Communications Consulting. This is the founder speaking." "Is this some kind of joke?" The voice was female, strained, and unmistakably Natasha Meridian. "What you're doing is harassment. It's defamation. I'm calling my lawyer." The irony was so perfect I had to suppress a laugh. The woman who had sent me explicit photos specifically to cause psychological damage was accusing me of harassment for sharing professional analysis that didn't even mention her name. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong number," I replied calmly. "This is a business line for Strategic Communications Consulting. Are you interested in crisis management services? I specialize in reputation recovery for individuals whose personal brands have been compromised by their own actions." "You know exactly who this is," Natasha hissed. "Take down those posts immediately, or I'll—" "You'll what?" I interrupted, my tone remaining professionally neutral. "Sue me for analyzing publicly available information about digital marketing psychology? Report me for sharing content that was sent to me directly? I'm curious about the legal theory you're planning to pursue." There was a long pause as Natasha apparently realized that every threat she might make would require her to acknowledge that the case study was, in fact, about her, which would mean admitting to the very behavior the case study exposed. "This isn't over," she said finally. "Actually, I think it is," I replied. "At least, it's over for you. But it's just beginning for me. Thank you for providing such compelling source material for my launch campaign. I couldn't have asked for a better demonstration of my strategic capabilities." I hung up and immediately screenshot the call log, adding it to my campaign documentation. Natasha's panicked response was actually perfect additional content. It showed the real-time impact of strategic communications on target psychology. By noon, my campaign had generated over 15,000 engagements across platforms, 47 direct messages from potential clients, and 12 meeting requests from marketing agencies and business development firms. More importantly, it had generated exactly the narrative I'd intended. This wasn't a bitter ex-wife getting revenge, but a skilled professional demonstrating her capabilities under pressure. The responses I was receiving weren't expressing sympathy for my personal situation. They were expressing admiration for my professional execution. People weren't seeing me as Derek's betrayed wife. They were seeing me as a strategic communications expert who could turn crisis into opportunity. "I need someone with your strategic thinking for our upcoming product launch," wrote Marcus Rodriguez, CEO of a regional tech startup. "If you can handle personal crisis this professionally, imagine what you could do with our marketing challenges." "Are you available for consulting?" asked Lisa Thompson, founder of a women's leadership organization. "We need someone who understands both digital psychology and crisis response. Your case study demonstrates exactly the expertise we're looking for." Each message represented the professional recognition I'd been craving for years while playing support staff to Derek's mediocre ambitions. These weren't people responding to drama. They were business leaders recognizing strategic excellence and wanting to hire it. At 12:45 p.m., Riley texted, "Holy shit, you're trending. Hashtag authenticity case is all over my social media feeds, and everyone's talking about the brilliant marketing strategy. How does it feel to watch your career explode in real time?" I looked around my home office, the same space where Derek had condescendingly dismissed my little computer projects just that morning. The same room where I'd spent 2 years building skills while he traveled to hotels with Natasha. The same desk where I'd cried over those first devastating photos just 24 hours ago. Now it was mission control for a viral campaign that was reshaping my entire professional identity. "It feels like coming home," I texted back. "Like finally being myself at full capacity." And that was exactly what it felt like. Not revenge, though justice was certainly satisfying. Not vindication, though professional recognition was gratifying. It felt like authenticity, the real kind, not the performed version that Natasha had built her brand around. For the first time in 4 years, I was operating at my actual capacity instead of the diminished version Derek had convinced me was appropriate. The strategic thinking, analytical frameworks, and execution planning I was deploying weren't new capabilities. They were existing strengths I'd finally given myself permission to use. As afternoon approached and my campaign continued to generate professional opportunities I'd only dreamed about, I realized that Derek and Natasha had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible. They had forced me to stop hiding who I really was. The woman Derek thought he was discarding had never existed in the first place. What he'd actually done was awaken someone far more formidable than he'd ever imagined possible. At 2:30 p.m., just as my campaign was reaching peak viral velocity, I received a message that would transform this from a successful professional launch into a phenomenon that would be studied in digital marketing courses for years to come. The message came from an unexpected source: Bethany Morris, Natasha's former business partner and the co-founder of their now-dissolved wellness coaching company. "I saw your campaign trending," Bethany's message began. "What Natasha did to you isn't the first time. I have documentation of her doing this to 3 other women over the past 2 years. Would you be interested in seeing a pattern of predatory behavior?" My hands actually trembled as I read those words. What I had thought was a personal attack specifically targeting me was apparently Natasha's established operating procedure. She was a serial homewrecker who had systematized the psychological destruction of other women. Within 20 minutes, Bethany had sent me an encrypted file containing chat logs, planning documents, and recorded phone conversations that revealed the staggering scope of Natasha's operations. This wasn't just an affair with Derek. It was evidence of a woman who had made a hobby out of targeting married men and then psychologically torturing their wives for her own entertainment. The first case involved Rebecca Walsh, a teacher from Westfield whose husband had worked with Natasha on a failed restaurant venture. The documentation showed Natasha using identical tactics: months of systematic undermining, explicit photo campaigns sent to the wife, and even the same strategic planning document template titled Project Liberation. Rebecca had eventually suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was hospitalized for severe anxiety and depression. The second case was Jennifer Park, a nurse practitioner whose husband had met Natasha at a networking event. Same pattern, same psychological warfare techniques, same documented planning approach. Jennifer had lost her job due to the emotional trauma and had to relocate to another state to escape the ongoing harassment. The third case was the most recent. Amanda Reeves, a small business owner whose husband had briefly dated Natasha before meeting his wife. Even though their relationship had ended years earlier, Natasha had apparently decided to destroy their marriage for the thrill of it. Amanda had attempted suicide and was currently in intensive therapy. 3 women, 3 families destroyed. 3 systematic campaigns of psychological terrorism that Natasha had documented, with the same clinical precision she'd used against me. The planning documents even showed her refining her techniques with each case, improving her psychological manipulation strategies, like someone optimizing a marketing campaign. "She keeps trophies," Bethany's follow-up message explained. Screenshots of the women crying in videos, recordings of phone calls where they're begging their husbands to end the affairs. Documentation of panic attacks and breakdowns. She shares them in a private group chat with other women who find this entertaining. I stared at my laptop screen, feeling a cold rage that went far beyond personal betrayal. This wasn't just about Derek's affair or even Natasha's cruelty toward me. This was about a predator who had turned the destruction of other women into entertainment, who had systematized psychological abuse, and who had apparently found an audience that enjoyed watching vulnerable people suffer. But as I processed the scope of what Bethany had revealed, I realized something crucial. She had just handed me the most powerful piece of evidence imaginable. Not just proof of Natasha's hypocrisy or cruelty, but documentation of a pattern of predatory behavior that would resonate with every woman who had ever worried about protecting her family from someone with malicious intentions. I immediately called Bethany directly, needing to understand the full context before deciding how to use this information. "Why are you sharing this with me?" I asked when she answered. "Because I've been carrying the guilt of knowing about this for 2 years without being able to do anything," Bethany replied, her voice heavy with regret. Those women couldn't fight back because Natasha isolated them, made them doubt their own perceptions, destroyed their support systems before they even understood what was happening. But you fought back. You turned her weapons against her, and that means you might be able to get justice for all of them. The weight of responsibility was staggering. This was no longer just about my personal situation or even my professional breakthrough. I was potentially the only person in a position to expose a serial predator who had been operating unchecked for years. "Do the other women know you're sharing this?" I asked. "Rebecca and Jennifer have given their explicit permission. They want their stories told if it means stopping Natasha from doing this to anyone else. Amanda is still too fragile, but her sister has legal power of attorney and has authorized me to share her documentation as well." I was quiet for a moment, understanding that I was being offered the opportunity to transform my viral campaign into something with genuine social impact. But I also understood the ethical weight of handling other women's trauma stories with the respect they deserved. "I need to think about how to approach this responsibly," I said finally. "I know, that's why I reached out to you instead of just posting everything myself. What you've done today shows real strategic thinking and ethical boundaries. You've exposed Natasha without exploiting your own pain, and you've built something constructive from a destructive situation." After our call ended, I spent an hour reviewing the additional documentation, my professional excitement warring with genuine horror at the scope of Natasha's predatory behavior. The planning documents were particularly chilling. They showed her analyzing each woman's psychological vulnerabilities, identifying their insecurities, and designing specific tactics to maximize emotional damage. But they also showed something else, a level of systematic cruelty that would appall even people who might have initially dismissed my situation as just a messy divorce. This wasn't about relationship drama or romantic competition. This was about someone who had weaponized intimacy and trust to cause maximum psychological harm to vulnerable people. At 4:15 p.m., I made the decision to expand my campaign with a follow-up post that would shift the narrative from personal vindication to public safety. I spent 45 minutes crafting content that honored the other women's experiences while maintaining the professional tone that had made my morning campaign so effective. The new post went live across all platforms simultaneously. Update: what I shared this morning about strategic crisis response has generated an overwhelming response, including contact from other women who have experienced similar systematic psychological campaigns. This isn't about one woman's affair. It's about a pattern of predatory behavior that deserves broader attention. Here's what we know about serial manipulation tactics and how to recognize them. The response was immediate and explosive. Within minutes, hashtag serial manipulator began trending alongside hashtag authenticity case. Comments poured in from women sharing their own experiences with psychological manipulation, domestic abuse survivors recognizing familiar patterns, and men expressing outrage at the systematic nature of Natasha's operations. But more importantly, the updated campaign attracted attention from legitimate journalists and advocacy organizations. Dr. Patricia Wong, a forensic psychologist who specialized in manipulation and coercive control, shared my analysis with the comment. This case study demonstrates textbook patterns of systematic psychological abuse. The documentation suggests organized predatory behavior that extends far beyond typical infidelity. By 5 p.m., 3 local news stations had contacted me for interviews. A nationally syndicated podcast about true crime psychology had requested a full episode, and 2 documentary filmmakers had reached out about potential projects examining systematic manipulation in the digital age. What had started as a campaign to expose one woman's cruelty and launch my digital marketing career had evolved into something approaching a public service announcement about recognizing and responding to psychological predators. My phone rang with another unknown number, but this time the caller ID showed it was coming from a law office in downtown Millbrook Heights. "This is Amanda Reeves's sister, calling on behalf of our family," the voice said when I answered. "We understand you've been documenting systematic manipulation patterns involving Natasha Meridian. We'd like to discuss potential legal collaboration." I looked around my home office, where just 6 hours earlier I had been planning to expose my cheating husband and his cruel girlfriend. Now I was apparently becoming the central figure in what might develop into a criminal investigation of serial psychological abuse. "I'd be very interested in that conversation," I replied, already mentally shifting from viral marketing campaign to potential legal case coordination. As evening approached and my campaign continued to generate national attention, I realized that Derek and Natasha hadn't just betrayed me, they had inadvertently made me the catalyst for exposing something far more dangerous than a simple affair. Sometimes the most personal betrayals uncover the most important public truths. By Thursday morning, less than 48 hours after Natasha had sent me those first photos, my dining room had been transformed into a crisis coordination center that would have impressed any emergency response team. Legal documents covered my table, my laptop displayed multiple browser tabs with investigative research, and my phone had become a constant stream of calls from journalists, lawyers, and advocacy organizations. At 8 a.m. sharp, I was joined by Amanda Reeves' sister Monica, Rebecca Walsh's attorney David Kim, and Jennifer Park herself, who had driven 3 hours from her new home in Springfield to participate in what we were calling the coordination meeting. These weren't just supporting players in my viral campaign, they were co-conspirators in dismantling a predator who had targeted them systematically. "Before we begin," I said, offering coffee to the group assembled around my dining table, "I want everyone to understand that this has grown beyond my original intention. What started as my professional response to personal betrayal has become something much larger, and I need your explicit consent to continue representing these cases publicly." Jennifer spoke first, her voice stronger than I'd expected given what she'd endured. "Natasha destroyed my family, my career, and my mental health because she thought it was entertaining. If you can stop her from doing this to other women, you have my full support." Rebecca's attorney nodded his agreement. "My client has been waiting 2 years for someone with the platform and expertise to bring this pattern to light. She's prepared to testify if criminal charges are filed." Monica pulled out a folder thick with documentation. Amanda attempted suicide because of Natasha's campaign. "She's still in intensive therapy, but she wants this woman stopped. Our family will provide whatever support is necessary for prosecution." The gravity of their trust was overwhelming. These weren't just victims seeking justice. They were survivors who had chosen to make themselves vulnerable again in service of protecting future targets. The responsibility of handling their stories ethically, while maintaining the momentum of my campaign, was both humbling and terrifying. "I've been contacted by Detective Sarah Crawford from the Millbrook Heights Police Department," I continued, consulting my notes. "She specializes in cyber harassment and psychological abuse cases. Apparently, the viral nature of our documentation has attracted official attention." David Kim leaned forward. What's their assessment of criminal liability? I opened my laptop to display the preliminary legal analysis I'd received from Detective Crawford's team. Potential charges include criminal harassment, cyberstalking, conspiracy to commit emotional distress, and something called, quote, systematic psychological manipulation, under updated domestic abuse statutes. The screen showed a comprehensive breakdown of how Natasha's documented behavior met legal definitions for various criminal offenses. The planning documents alone provided evidence of premeditation and intent to cause psychological harm. The coordination with Derek and others suggested possible conspiracy charges. The pattern across multiple victims established serial predatory behavior. More importantly, I continued, they're investigating whether this extends beyond the 4 cases we know about. Detective Crawford believes Natasha's methods are too sophisticated to have developed in isolation. They're looking for additional victims and potential accomplices. Jennifer's expression darkened. You mean there might be more women we don't know about? Or a network of people doing this systematically, Monica added grimly. Amanda's therapist said the psychological manipulation techniques were almost textbook, like someone had studied how to cause maximum emotional damage efficiently. This possibility had been haunting me since reviewing Bethany's documentation. Natasha's campaigns were too refined, too psychologically sophisticated, too systematically cruel to be the work of someone operating purely on instinct. The planning documents read like someone had studied psychological warfare and applied those principles to targeting vulnerable women. Detective Crawford wants to meet with all of us next week, I said. But in the meantime, we need to decide how to handle the media attention. My campaign has generated interview requests from national outlets, and they're specifically interested in the serial predator angle. David Kim consulted his legal pad. From Rebecca's perspective, media attention serves our interests. The more public awareness we generate, the more likely additional victims will come forward, and the more pressure prosecutors feel to pursue serious charges. Jennifer agrees, she said firmly. This woman operated in shadows for years because her victims were isolated and ashamed. Public exposure prevents her from using those same tactics against future targets. Monica nodded as well. Amanda can't participate directly, but she wants her story included in any media coverage that might prevent other families from going through what we've experienced. I felt a surge of admiration for these women. They had survived systematic psychological abuse and were now choosing to make themselves public advocates for justice. Their courage was both inspiring and professionally instructive. This was crisis communications at its most essential level. Then we coordinate, I decided. I'll handle the strategic communications and media management. David, you manage legal coordination with Detective Crawford's team. Monica, you liaison with victim advocacy organizations who've been reaching out. Jennifer, you coordinate with any additional victims who contact us through the campaign. Over the next 2 hours, we developed a comprehensive strategy that balanced public awareness with legal protection, victim advocacy with strategic communication, and my professional growth with genuine social impact. It was the most sophisticated crisis management operation I'd ever designed, and it was being implemented in real time with national attention. There's something else, Jennifer said as we were finalizing our coordination plan. I've been in contact with 2 other women who think they might have been targeted by Natasha but weren't sure until they saw your campaign. One is local, Jessica Martinez, whose husband works in tech. The other is from Chicago, which suggests Natasha's operations might be geographically broader than we realized. The scope kept expanding. What I'd thought was a local predator was apparently someone with multi-state reach and increasingly sophisticated targeting methods. The documentation was beginning to suggest organized operation rather than individual pathology. At 11:30 a.m., my phone rang with a call from Dr. Patricia Wong, the forensic psychologist who had endorsed my initial analysis. I've been studying the documentation you've shared publicly, she said after I answered. This case has potential to establish new legal precedents for prosecuting systematic psychological manipulation. Would you be interested in academic collaboration? What kind of collaboration? I asked, already intrigued by the implications. Case study development for law enforcement training. Publication in peer-reviewed journals on digital age abuse patterns. Possibly testimony in legislative hearings about updating cyber harassment laws. Dr. Wong paused. What you've documented here represents emerging forms of predatory behavior that current legal frameworks don't adequately address. I looked around my dining room, where 3 days ago I'd been just Derek's wife planning our weekend activities. Now I was apparently becoming a nationally recognized expert in systematic psychological manipulation, with potential influence on legal policy development. I'm very interested, I replied, already mentally organizing how to balance this opportunity with my other new responsibilities. As the meeting concluded and my collaborators departed to handle their respective roles in our expanding operation, I realized that Derek and Natasha's betrayal had inadvertently created something unprecedented. A real-time case study in how to transform personal victimization into systematic social change. My viral campaign had evolved from revenge to justice to advocacy to potential legal reform. What they'd intended as my destruction had become the foundation for protecting countless other women from similar predation. At 1 p.m., I received a text message from Derek. "What you've done is insane. People are calling me at work asking about domestic abuse charges. This has gone too far." I screenshot the message and added it to our documentation file. Even in the face of documented evidence that his girlfriend was a serial predator who had victimized multiple women, Derek was primarily concerned about inconvenience to himself. I texted back, "What's insane is that you spent 8 months collaborating with a woman who systematically destroys other women for entertainment. What's insane is that you filmed yourself calling your wife pathetic while your girlfriend planned her psychological destruction. What's insane is that you're upset about being held accountable for enabling a predator." Then I blocked his number and returned to my work coordinating what was rapidly becoming the most important project of my life. Some betrayals destroy you. Others reveal exactly who you were meant to become. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to my door. Through the security camera I'd installed after receiving several threatening messages from anonymous accounts, I watched Natasha Meridian herself walking up my front pathway, her designer heels clicking against the concrete with the kind of aggressive confidence that suggested this wasn't a social call. She looked different from the polished lifestyle influencer I'd seen in photos and videos. Her usually immaculate hair was pulled back severely, her makeup appeared hastily applied, and there was something frantic in her body language that suggested the past 2 days hadn't been kind to her carefully curated public image. I opened the door before she could ring the bell, maintaining the calm demeanor that had served me so well throughout this entire ordeal. "Natasha, I was wondering when you'd decide to handle this face-to-face." "You need to stop this immediately," she said without preamble, her voice carrying an edge of desperation I hadn't heard in her previous phone call. "What you've done is destroying innocent people's lives. Derek has nothing to do with whatever vendetta you think you're pursuing." The attempt to position Derek as an innocent victim was so audacious that I had to admire her strategic thinking, even as I recognized it as pure manipulation. She was trying to separate herself from the most damaging evidence by portraying him as someone who'd been caught up in her schemes rather than an active collaborator. "Would you like to come in?" I asked pleasantly. "I think this conversation might benefit from privacy." Natasha hesitated, probably calculating whether entering my home would give me some kind of advantage, then nodded curtly. As she crossed my threshold, I noticed her glancing around with the kind of analytical attention that suggested she was gathering intelligence about my living situation. "Nice place," she said with false casualness. "Very suburban. I can see why Derek felt limited here." The casual cruelty was so characteristic that I almost smiled. Even in the middle of what was clearly a crisis management visit, Natasha couldn't resist a dig designed to make me feel inadequate about my lifestyle choices. "Can I offer you something to drink?" I asked, leading her toward my living room. "Coffee? Water? Or perhaps you'd prefer something stronger. You look like you've had a difficult few days. Natasha's composure flickered momentarily before she reasserted control. I'm fine. I just came here to discuss how we can resolve this situation like mature adults. I settled into my favorite armchair and gestured for her to take the couch. The positioning wasn't accidental. I wanted the psychological advantage of being slightly elevated while she sat in the lower, softer furniture that would make her feel less secure. I'm listening, I said, curious to see what kind of resolution strategy she'd developed. Natasha took a deep breath, clearly transitioning into a prepared presentation. What happened between Derek and me was unfortunate, but it's not the systematic campaign you're portraying. People make mistakes when they're unhappy in their relationships. The way you've twisted our private moments into some kind of predatory conspiracy is honestly unhinged. The gaslighting was sophisticated, acknowledged partial culpability while reframing systematic abuse as relationship mistakes and psychological manipulation as normal behavior. She was trying to make me doubt my own perception of documented evidence. What about Rebecca Walsh? I asked directly. Was that also just an unfortunate mistake? Natasha's pause was barely perceptible, but I caught it. I don't know what you mean. The teacher from Westfield, whose husband you systematically targeted 3 years ago. The woman who ended up hospitalized for severe anxiety after you sent her explicit photos and implemented your Project Liberation timeline against her family. I watched Natasha's face carefully as I spoke, noting the micro-expressions that suggested recognition despite her verbal denial. Her left eye twitched slightly when I mentioned the planning document, and her hands clenched briefly at the reference to hospitalization. I think you've been listening to some very troubled people who are projecting their own relationship failures onto me, she said finally. Women sometimes blame other women for their husbands' choices because it's easier than accepting their own inadequacies. The response was telling in multiple ways. She hadn't actually denied knowing Rebecca. She'd just redirected blame while simultaneously attacking both Rebecca and me. It was a classic manipulation technique designed to make me defend myself rather than pursue the line of questioning. What about Jennifer Park? I continued. Amanda Reeves? Are they also troubled women projecting their relationship failures? Natasha's composure was beginning to crack. You're clearly obsessed with creating some kind of conspiracy theory to justify your own inability to keep your husband interested. This is textbook delusional behavior. Actually, I said, reaching for my laptop which I had positioned strategically on the coffee table, this is textbook documentation. Would you like to see the planning documents you created for each of these women? The psychological manipulation timelines? The trophy collection Bethany told me about? Natasha went very still. Bethany is a bitter ex-business partner who provided chat logs, recorded phone conversations, and strategic planning documents spanning 2 years, I interrupted, including your discussions about optimizing emotional damage protocols and improving breakdown response times. The clinical language I'd found in Natasha's own documentation was particularly damning when read back to her. She had literally treated the psychological destruction of other women as a performance optimization challenge. You're taking things out of context, Natasha said, but her voice had lost its initial confidence. Private conversations between friends don't constitute criminal activity. Private conversations about how to systematically destroy other women's mental health absolutely constitute criminal activity when they're accompanied by documented implementation, I replied. Detective Crawford was very clear about that when we met yesterday. Natasha's face went pale at the mention of police involvement. You actually went to the police? Over a relationship issue? I went to the police about a pattern of systematic psychological abuse targeting multiple victims. The detective was particularly interested in your trophy collection and the evidence of premeditation in your planning documents. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward her, displaying the case summary Detective Crawford had prepared. Natasha's eyes widened as she saw official police letterhead and formal criminal investigation terminology applied to her activities. This is insane, she whispered. I never committed any crimes. I never physically hurt anyone. Psychological abuse is criminal, Natasha. Systematic harassment is criminal. Conspiracy to cause emotional distress is criminal. Cyber stalking is criminal. I paused, letting each charge register. And documenting your campaigns while sharing them for entertainment makes everything worse from a legal perspective. Natasha stared at the police documentation, probably realizing for the first time that her sophisticated psychological warfare might have legal consequences beyond social media backlash. "What do you want?" she asked finally, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Money? A public apology? Derek back? What will make this stop?" The question revealed so much about her psychology. Even now, facing potential criminal charges, she assumed this was about negotiable commodities rather than justice for systematic harm. "I want you to stop targeting women for psychological destruction," I said simply. "I want the other victims to get justice. I want potential future victims to be protected. And I want law enforcement to understand how this kind of predatory behavior operates so they can prosecute it effectively." "You're destroying my entire life over a relationship mistake," Natasha said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I'm revealing who you actually are beneath the persona you constructed," I corrected. "You destroyed your own life by systematically abusing vulnerable women for entertainment. I just made sure people could see it." Natasha sat in silence for a long moment, probably processing that there was no negotiation possible, no angle that would make this go away quietly. "Derek will never forgive you for this," she said finally, as if that threat still held some power over me. I smiled genuinely for the first time in our conversation. "Natasha, Derek's opinion of me stopped mattering the moment I discovered what kind of person he actually was underneath his carefully maintained facade. Just like your opinion of yourself stopped mattering when people discovered what kind of person you actually are." She stood abruptly, her designer handbag clutched tightly against her chest like armor. "This isn't over." "Actually," I said, remaining seated as she moved toward my front door, "it is over. For you anyway. Your career as a lifestyle influencer is finished, your business relationships are dissolved, and you're facing potential criminal charges. The only question now is whether you cooperate with the investigation or make everything worse by continuing to deny documented evidence." As Natasha left my house, walking quickly toward her car without looking back, I realized I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Not for the consequences she was facing, but for the psychological emptiness that had driven her to find entertainment in other people's suffering. But the pity was brief. As I watched her drive away, probably rushing to her lawyer or to coordinate damage control with Derek, I felt primarily satisfaction that a predator had been exposed and stopped. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones where you finally get to look someone directly in the eye and tell them exactly who they are. 3 weeks after Natasha's desperate visit to my home, I sat in the conference room of Preston & Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the region, surrounded by partners who had flown in from 3 different states to discuss what they were calling the Meridian Precedent. The mahogany table was covered with legal briefs, media coverage printouts, and consulting contracts that represented more money than I'd earned in the previous 2 years combined. "The prosecution is moving forward with charges in all 4 documented cases," announced Catherine Preston, the firm's managing partner and a woman whose reputation in complex litigation was legendary. District Attorney Morrison believes this will establish crucial precedent for prosecuting systematic psychological manipulation in the digital age. Detective Crawford, who had become something of a regular collaborator over the past weeks, spread out a timeline showing the investigation's progress. "We've identified 3 additional potential victims in neighboring states, and the FBI is now involved due to the interstate nature of the conspiracy. Natasha's planning documents have been invaluable for understanding how these campaigns operate." I studied the timeline, noting how my viral campaign had triggered a cascade of legal and investigative developments that extended far beyond anything I could have imagined when I'd first pressed, quote, "enter" on that LinkedIn post. The case was now being studied by law enforcement agencies as a model for recognizing and prosecuting emerging forms of digital abuse. From a civil litigation perspective, added Marcus Chen, the firm's specialist in technology law, we're looking at potentially groundbreaking damages claims. The documented premeditation and systematic nature of the abuse could result in significant financial compensation for the victims. This was the part that still felt surreal. What had started as my strategic response to personal betrayal had evolved into a legal case that might influence how courts handled psychological abuse for decades to come. Law schools were already requesting permission to use our documentation as teaching materials, and I'd received interview requests from legal journals, psychology publications, and technology policy organizations. More importantly for your immediate situation, Catherine continued, the consulting opportunities are substantial. We fielded inquiries from corporations wanting crisis communication strategies, law enforcement agencies requesting training programs, and advocacy organizations seeking expertise in digital psychology. She handed me a folder containing proposal outlines that made my head spin. A Fortune 500 company wanted me to develop protocols for handling systematic harassment of their female executives. The Department of Justice was interested in my analysis frameworks for identifying predatory behavior patterns. 3 universities had offered visiting lecturer positions to teach strategic communications and crisis response. The Peterson Group alone is offering a 6-figure contract for developing their internal crisis management protocols, Marcus noted. They specifically want expertise in, quote, transforming adversarial situations into strategic advantages, which is apparently how they're describing your approach. I looked around the conference room, reflecting on how dramatically my professional landscape had changed. A month ago, I'd been Derek's wife, building small social media campaigns for local businesses, while he dismissed my work as playing on the computer. Now I was sitting with some of the region's most powerful attorneys, discussing legal precedent and consulting contracts that would establish me as a nationally recognized expert. There's something else, Detective Crawford said, consulting her notes. Derek has been attempting to distance himself from Natasha's activities through his attorney. He's claiming he was manipulated and wasn't aware of the broader pattern of abuse. I almost laughed at the predictability. Let me guess. He's positioning himself as another victim? Essentially, yes. His legal team is arguing that he was romantically manipulated by a sophisticated predator and had no knowledge of her systematic targeting of other women. Catherine's expression hardened. Unfortunately for Derek, the video evidence suggests enthusiastic participation rather than victimization. His recorded comments about your supposed inadequacies and his collaboration in the psychological manipulation timeline make the quote, innocent victim defense extremely difficult to maintain. This was one aspect of the legal proceedings that I found particularly satisfying. Derek's attempt to rebrand himself as Natasha's victim required acknowledging that systematic psychological manipulation was, in fact, abusive, which undermined any defense against his own participation in that abuse. What's his current situation? I asked, though I felt emotionally detached from Derek's fate in a way that would have surprised me a month earlier. Fired from his startup position, Detective Crawford reported. The company released a statement about not tolerating employees who participate in harassment campaigns. His professional reputation in the tech industry is essentially destroyed, and he's facing potential civil liability from all the documented victims. The karma was so perfect it felt almost scripted. Derek, who had spent years undermining my professional confidence while building his own career, now found himself unemployable in his chosen field while I was building a nationally recognized consultancy. And Natasha? I asked. Complete professional collapse, Catherine replied with professional satisfaction. Her influencer career is over, her brand consulting business has dissolved, all her corporate partnerships have been terminated, and she's facing criminal charges in multiple jurisdictions. Her legal bills alone will probably bankrupt her. Marcus pulled up a social media monitoring report on his tablet. The hashtags from your original campaign are still being used to warn people about systematic manipulation. #AuthenicityCase has become shorthand for exposing professional hypocrisy, and #serial manipulator is being used by abuse survivors to share their stories. The cultural impact was something I hadn't anticipated but found deeply gratifying. My strategic response to personal betrayal had created linguistic tools that other people were using to identify and resist similar abuse. The frameworks I'd developed for analyzing Natasha's behavior were being adapted by other women to understand their own situations. Speaking of cultural impact, Catherine said, opening another folder, we've received inquiries from 3 documentary filmmakers, 2 podcast networks, and a streaming platform about adaptation rights to your story. The interest is substantial. I shook my head, still processing the scope of opportunities that had emerged from what Derek and Natasha had intended as my destruction. A month ago, my biggest professional aspiration was optimizing Instagram engagement for a local bakery. Now people want to make documentaries about my crisis management techniques. The transformation is remarkable, agreed Dr. Patricia Wong, who had joined our meeting via video call from her university office. From a psychological perspective, you've demonstrated something crucial about resilience and strategic thinking under pressure. Your case is being studied in our graduate program as an example of how to convert trauma into empowerment. The academic validation was particularly meaningful to me. After years of having my intellectual capabilities dismissed by Derek, being recognized by university professors and legal experts felt like reclaiming a fundamental part of my identity. What we're proposing, Catherine said, bringing the discussion back to practical matters, is a comprehensive strategic communications consultancy with specialization in crisis response and reputation management. You'd have the firm's full legal and business development support, but complete creative control over your methodology and client selection. The proposal outlined a business structure that would allow me to pursue the cases and causes that interested me most, while building a sustainable, high-impact career. It was everything I'd dreamed of during those long evenings when Derek was away on his business trips, and I was imagining what I might accomplish if given the opportunity. There's one condition I need to include, I said after reviewing the partnership terms. A percentage of our profits goes toward funding legal support for women facing systematic psychological abuse who can't afford representation. This case has shown me how many people suffer in silence because they lack resources to fight back. Catherine smiled approvingly. That's exactly the kind of social impact component that will differentiate your consultancy in the market. Clients want to work with firms that have demonstrated ethical leadership and genuine commitment to justice. As the meeting concluded and I gathered the contracts and proposals that would reshape my professional future, I reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought me to this moment. Derek and Natasha's betrayal, intended to diminish and discard me, had instead revealed capabilities I'd forgotten I possessed and created opportunities I'd never imagined possible. Walking out of Preston and Associates toward my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete alignment between my values, my capabilities, and my circumstances. For the first time since college, I was operating at full capacity in service of work that genuinely mattered. My phone buzzed with a text from Riley. Saw the news coverage of the prosecution announcement. How does it feel to have accidentally become a nationally recognized expert in strategic crisis management? I looked up at the late afternoon sky, thinking about how to answer that question honestly. It doesn't feel accidental at all, I texted back. It feels like finally becoming who I was supposed to be all along. 6 months after Natasha Meridian had sent me those 65 photos hoping to destroy my life, I stood at the podium of the International Conference on Digital Psychology and Crisis Communication, looking out at an audience of 1,500 professionals who had gathered to hear my keynote address on Strategic Response to Systematic Manipulation, a case study in transforming personal crisis into professional excellence. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was delivering this presentation from the grand ballroom of the Westbrook Hotel, the same venue where Derek had planned to announce his departure from our marriage, while Natasha documented his cruelty for her entertainment. Today, that same space was filled with law enforcement officers, digital marketing specialists, academic researchers, and victim advocacy professionals who had come to learn from the strategic framework I'd developed during the darkest period of my personal life. 18 months ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system to every corner of the ballroom. I was a woman who had convinced herself that diminishing her own capabilities was a form of love. I had advanced degrees in communications and digital strategy, but I was using those skills to optimize Instagram posts for cupcake shops while my husband built what he believed was a revolutionary app that would change the world. Scattered laughter rippled through the audience, the knowing kind that comes from people who recognize the familiar pattern of talented women making themselves smaller to accommodate mediocre men. What I didn't know was that while I was supporting his vision, he was collaborating with a lifestyle influencer named Natasha Meridian to systematically undermine my self-worth as preparation for discarding me in the most psychologically damaging way possible. What they didn't know was that they were about to provide me with the perfect case study for demonstrating advanced crisis communications under extreme personal pressure. I clicked to my first slide, which displayed the original LinkedIn post that had launched everything. The audience could see the real-time engagement metrics I'd achieved. Over 2 million impressions within 72 hours, coverage in major news outlets, and the viral hashtags that were still being used by abuse survivors worldwide. The Meridian case, as it's now known in legal and academic circles, resulted in criminal convictions for systematic psychological manipulation, civil damages exceeding $800,000 for the documented victims, and policy changes in how law enforcement agencies investigate digital abuse. But more importantly for this audience, it demonstrated how strategic communications principles can transform personal victimization into social impact. The slides that followed showed the progression from crisis to opportunity, with detailed analysis of timing strategies, audience psychology, content optimization, and stakeholder coordination. This wasn't just the story of my personal vindication. It was a masterclass in applied crisis communications that had been studied and replicated by professionals across multiple industries. The key insight, I continued, is that the most devastating personal attacks often reveal the attacker's greatest vulnerabilities. Natasha built her brand on authenticity and supporting other women while secretly systematizing the psychological destruction of vulnerable women for entertainment. The cognitive dissonance between her public persona and private behavior created perfect conditions for strategic exposure. In the audience, I spotted several faces that had become familiar over the past months. Detective Crawford, who now consulted with our firm on digital abuse cases. Dr. Patricia Wong, whose research on systematic manipulation had been informed by our documentation. Rebecca Walsh, Jennifer Park, and Monica Reeves, who had become powerful advocates for legislative reform based on their experiences. But strategic response requires something beyond professional expertise, I said, moving to the more personal elements of my presentation. It requires the willingness to operate at your actual capacity rather than the diminished version of yourself that others may find more comfortable. This was the part of my story that resonated most deeply with audiences, the recognition that many talented people, particularly women, had been conditioned to minimize their own capabilities to avoid threatening others' sense of superiority. For 4 years, I had convinced myself that being a supportive wife meant accepting my husband's assessment of my potential rather than developing my own. The night I discovered his betrayal, I had to choose between accepting his narrative about my inadequacy or demonstrating what I was actually capable of when I stopped limiting myself to his expectations. I clicked to a slide showing the business metrics from my consultancy: 43 clients in 6 months. Average campaign success rate of 94%, and a waiting list of organizations seeking strategic communications expertise. The transformation from Derek's dismissed wife to nationally recognized consultant was documented in concrete professional achievements that spoke louder than any personal testimony. Strategic Communications Solutions has now handled crisis response for Fortune 500 companies, law enforcement agencies, advocacy organizations, and individual clients facing systematic harassment, We've established legal precedents, influenced policy development, and created frameworks that are being taught in universities and training programs worldwide. The slide transitioned to show testimonials from clients and collaborators. A tech CEO whose company had faced coordinated harassment campaigns. Their strategic framework didn't just resolve our crisis. It positioned us as industry leaders in ethical response protocols. A prosecutor who had used our documentation methods in multiple cases. The Meridian precedent has revolutionized how we approach systematic abuse prosecutions. The consulting work is professionally fulfilling, I said, but the most important outcome has been the cultural shift in how systematic manipulation is recognized and addressed. The hashtag authenticity case and hashtag serial manipulator hashtags have become tools for abuse survivors to identify patterns and connect with resources. The legal frameworks we developed are being used to prosecute similar cases nationwide. I paused, looking out at an audience that included some of the most influential professionals in crisis communications, law enforcement, and victim advocacy. A year ago, these were people whose work I had admired from a distance while building social media campaigns for local businesses. Now they were colleagues and collaborators in work that was reshaping how society understood and responded to systematic psychological abuse. The personal cost of this transformation was significant, I acknowledged. My marriage ended, relationships were redefined, and I had to rebuild my understanding of my own capabilities and worth. But the professional and social impact has exceeded anything I could have imagined when I was operating at a fraction of my actual capacity. I clicked to my final slide, which showed a simple quote. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals create openings for our greatest contributions. Derek and Natasha intended to destroy me psychologically so they could pursue their relationship without the inconvenience of my expectations or emotions. Instead, their documented cruelty became the foundation for a career that allows me to help other people transform their own crises into opportunities for growth and impact. The standing ovation began before I finished speaking, building throughout the ballroom as 1,500 professionals recognized not just a successful case study, but a demonstration of what was possible when someone refused to accept others' limitations as their own reality. As I left the podium and moved through the crowd of people wanting to discuss collaboration opportunities, speaking engagements, and consulting proposals, I caught sight of myself in the mirrored wall of the ballroom. The woman reflected there bore little resemblance to the person who had sat in her home office 6 months earlier, crying over photos that were meant to break her spirit. That woman had been Derek's wife, defined by her relationship to someone who fundamentally undervalued her capabilities. The woman in the mirror was someone entirely different, a nationally recognized expert whose strategic thinking was sought by organizations facing their most complex challenges. My phone buzzed with a text from Riley, watching the live stream from the hospital break room. Half the staff is here cheering. How does it feel to be officially famous for being brilliant? I stepped outside the ballroom into the hotel's atrium, looking up at the soaring ceiling where Derek had once planned to announce his liberation from our inadequate marriage. The space felt entirely different now, not a venue for personal humiliation, but a symbol of how completely circumstances could be transformed through strategic thinking and willingness to operate at full capacity. It feels like coming home, I texted back, like finally being exactly who I was meant to be. And that was exactly right. This wasn't just about professional success or personal vindication, or even justice for systematic abuse, though all of those elements were deeply satisfying. This was about authenticity in its truest form, the alignment of capabilities, values, and circumstances that creates genuine power. Derek and Natasha had tried to diminish me into someone manageable and disposable. Instead, they had forced me to discover who I actually was when I stopped accepting their limitations as my reality. Sometimes the cruelest betrayals become the greatest gifts, revealing strengths you never knew you possessed and opening doors you never imagined walking through. The woman Derek had dismissed as boring and unambitious had become someone whose strategic thinking was studied by professionals worldwide. The wife Natasha had targeted for psychological destruction had become an advocate whose work protected countless other women from similar predation. Most importantly, the person I had been when I limited myself to others' expectations had evolved into someone whose contributions exceeded anything I had dared to dream possible. That transformation, born from betrayal but built through strategic excellence, was the most authentic victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.